Yeah. I think there's a severe lack of love on both sides of the political spectrum.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's so much that they hate each other as they're afraid of what the other believes. And because of the implication of what they fear that the other side believes, they feel threatened by it, and that devolves into hatred. But I don't think that the opposite of love is hatred. I think the opposite of love is fear.
Interesting.
As I'm reading through Scripture, I find that principle is very clearly articulated in Scripture in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 18, where it says, "There is no fear in love." And so those are the two opposite ends of that spectrum, I think. And we often think that the opposite of love is hatred, but I think it's fear, and fear leads to hatred.
Yes.
And maybe that's why you and I were drawn to military service, because also in Scripture, greater love hath no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friend. And I think that is something so unique about military service, about law enforcement, about first responders like firefighters, is they are literally willing to sacrifice their lives for people who don't agree with them, and who in many cases hate them because they fear what they may believe. And we're just not very good at communicating what we believe in love.
Yep. Yeah, and just recognizing that when you get it into an argument with somebody, you're not necessarily going to win them over right there in the middle of that argument. But you definitely won't do it if you're a jerk with your points, or if you're mean, or if you castigate their humanity and what they believe. You're not going to win them over like that. But if you approach it with grace and with persistence and clarity, they'll at least probably listen, and they'll go back and reflect on what was said. And that's the only way to, I think, bring unity based on truth, because the truth can offend. The truth does challenge. But it has to be said with grace and humility consistently out of love. And it's the only way minds can be changed. Good day, everybody. Welcome to Fire for Effect podcast episode 24. My name is James McBride, and we got Marcus Moyer with us. And today we're recording this on January 1st, 2026. We made it to 2026. So that's awesome. We both were up late last night watching the festivities. And I want to commend where Marcus Moyer lives in the D.C. area. It was a surprise even to him when I saw on TV the Washington Monument lit up with an unbelievable display, and I'll let you describe it, that is very just patriotic and motivating, and was a surprise to a lot of people. How you doing, Marcus?
Doing great, man. Excited to start 2026. I'm trusting God for great things in this year, and I just hope that He'll allow me to be a part of whatever He has planned. There's certainly a lot of challenges facing us in this new year across the country, and especially here in Virginia, which we won't get into on this episode. I think we've kind of already laid it out in the previous episode. But yeah, last night's display on the Washington Monument, I thought that was super cool. Production quality is what you would expect. The only thing that I didn't like about it is that the screen was too small. The Washington Monument's very narrow. I would have loved to have seen that same story portrayed on a huge wall. But yeah, just basically walking through America's history, the different eras of American history, and paying tribute to what truly is a great country. And it pains my heart to see it attacked and torn down and derided the way it is often these days. But I hope that's one of the things that'll turn around in 2026. I hope people will find a renewed love of God, a love of faith, love of family, love of country. All of those things are worth loving and defending. And displays like that and other things that this administration has tried to do as we come up on our 250th year. We celebrated the Army's birthday last year, and we've got a lot of major milestones in America's history to celebrate this year in our 250th. I think it's important to do those things like they did last night because it's not an understatement to say that the survival of the country depends on it. I don't know who said it, but it's true. You can't keep what you won't defend, and you will never defend what you don't love. And so if we don't foster a love of country, we will lose it.
Yeah, Jan Hersey Ali said something to that effect in an essay she wrote, I think it was last year or the year before, Why I Became a Christian. And it's one of my favorite quotes. And she basically says what you just said, that, if you don't know why you believe and what you believe, and you can't defend it, then why would you expect anyone to defend it? If you can't defend, Western civilization or Christianity, or against those who are attacking it, then um, it's bound to fall apart or crumble. It's definitely
Yeah.
true. We were talking offline just about steel manning arguments, and knowing what you believe and being able to argue them well. Which unless you practice it, it's hard to do. Like I'm talking confidently right now, but if I'm challenged by somebody uh, with arguments that are against mine that are well articulated, if you don't practice it, you're gonna get crushed. So anyway, yeah, we got to know.
When you grow up in an echo chamber,
Yeah,
that tends to happen. And that's true on both sides, right, of an argument. And we talked about it a little bit before, but the church that I grew up in, it was very much an echo chamber. And if you grow up in conservative circles, so if you go to a Christian school, for example, and I'm not knocking that at all. I love Christian education. Both my kids are in Christian school, but there is that danger that you grow up being drowned in the dogma, if I can say that, without being taught why it's true and taught how
yeah.
to defend it or articulate it. And so the folks that are the product of that, they're often very good at regurgitating the slogans and the phrases and the histories that they've been taught from childhood. But as you said, as soon as it's subjected to just a little bit of pressure or questioning, if it doesn't go any deeper than that, then it starts to crumble. And it's important for us to be better articulators of what we believe.
Especially if the challenge comes with emotion and passion, and victim victimhood and all that stuff. It's hard to, for those of us who are softies like myself, like it's easy to get to feel bad, feel sorry for, all that stuff. So yeah, it's got to know our stuff, and that's kind of the part of the reason for this episode, the topic of this episode, um, which is kind of laying out um, a a view that I think Marcus and I have would agree to most of it, and we'll talk about it. I may not agree with every single point, but I personally agree with what we're going to talk about today. It's from an article from a website called the Imaginative Conservative, and the article is called Conservative Credo, and is written back in April 25th, 2013, by Barbara J. Elliott. And I stumbled upon this about 4 or 5 years ago, while I was in the Pentagon. And you and I were in the Pentagon mostly the same time. You're there. You're still there, frankly. I was there. The first year I was there was um, the last year of President Trump's first term, and then my second year there was the first year of President Biden's term. Um, and it also coincides with the 2020 riots and COVID and the lockdowns and all this stuff that was happening. And as we all know, it was regardless of what your beliefs are and all those issues, it was a societal upheaval like we have not seen since the 1960s, which is before my time. and it led to a lot of both societal and individual challenging of beliefs and questioning, what we believed, because the movement that was really disrupting things was coming heavily from leftist ideology, um, based on real and perceived grievances that were happening, have happened throughout history, and were happening in real time, and it definitely influenced, challenge what um, what a lot of us believe are the foundational values of what America is, and not just America, but just Western society and our values in general that I took for granted my whole life. Um, and I think a lot of people that join the military join it for, you know, understandably, patriotic reasons. Are proud of our country, proud of our founding values. You want to join the military to support and defend those values, embodied in the Constitution and articulated very clearly, I think, in the Declaration of Independence. And then, we talked about the echo chamber, and then you're kind of in that society of like-minded folks that think that way, and you're willing to, train hard and die to defend all that stuff. And you don't necessarily see the other side. Well, the other side, the other perspective, the kind of anti-American perspective, or the critical eye of America's founding and values and everything came out powerfully in 2020, 2021, 2022, and it's still reverberating today. However, I think it's leveled off a little bit, and there's been kind of a backlash, and kind of things are getting a little more stabilized. But anyway, at that time in the Pentagon, between the two administrations, the the culture in the Pentagon was stark as far as like what was important to the administration was just a night and day difference. In fact, right at the end of Trump's first term, the first year, right before he left office, if you remember, there was that 1776 initiative that I think Secretary, who was it? So Trump's Secretary of State in his first term was Rex Tillerson, didn't last very long, and then it was Mike Pompeo, who lasted most of his term. And right towards the end of Trump's first term, Mike Pompeo, there was an initiative led by him that came up with the 1776 initiative, I think it was called. And it just kind of laid out rearticulated our basic fundamental American values, founded on biblical beliefs and, of course, uh, ancient, Greek philosophy and the Magna Carta and all that stuff, and just kind of rearticulated it. And it was a very succinct document, easy to digest. You can find it today. Afterwards, they made it into a book, and of course, Amazon sells it as a book. But I think you can find it free online as well. And one of the first things the Biden administration did when he came in was trash that 1776 initiative. There was nothing, in my mind, there's nothing controversial about it at all. It was just laying out the American foundational values. And the first thing the administration did was trash it, which is just a microcosm of the different philosophies that the two administrations had. And I'm not talking about the nuances and the details of the personalities and all that stuff between Trump and Biden. I'm not trying to get into all that. I'm just talking about the basic fundamental beliefs and what makes America a strong, good, moral country with flaws, with a lot of mistakes throughout our existence as a country, but overall a force for good. Particularly when we live closer to the ideals that America was founded upon. Anyway, I don't want to beat a dead horse here because we're going to go into it, all these points from this article, because it kind of lays that out. These points are as close to what I believe that I've ever read in my mind, as far as kind of incorporating both my Christian beliefs with my cultural beliefs and American beliefs, all together. It's not a political document. It's from, again, it's called the Christian Conservative, or the Imaginative Conservative website. So a very faith-based website, but it incorporates faith and culture and politics. And so, and for the audience, really quick, we we do the best we can to make this podcast easy to just listen to without having to see anything. But at the same time, we also put in for the visual audiences, and you can watch it visually, of course, on YouTube, and you can watch it visually on Spotify, which I didn't know until a few months ago that Spotify podcasts have a video version right there within Spotify. But we'll put some visual aids as we're talking throughout this podcast, and we have through all of our other podcasts as well. So if you're able to view the podcast, you'll get even more information. But we'll try to just articulate it verbally as well. So I'll put up on the screen afterwards. I'll edit it in. But the Imaginative Conservative Credo by Barbara J. Elliott, April 25th, 2013. And I'll just kind of summarize that. There's 12 kind of paragraphs of core beliefs that this author put out there. And we'll start from the top and go down. I'll just start with the first one. And she writes that conservatism seeks the truth that has emerged over time. And the truth is capital T. Drawing from the deep wellsprings of human experience and builds anew on foundations that have withstood tests of time. It fosters order and the flourishing of human beings as they live in relationship with one another. And we are united in the eternal contract between the dead, the living, and the yet unborn. So that's his principle number one. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, on the whole article, you did a great job leading into it. When people say that they're a conservative, I read an article not too long ago where somebody was deconstructing that. It's like, what do you mean you're a conservative? What do you want to conserve? And I'd never heard the question asked quite that way before, but it's a good question. It's a fair question that you probably never heard from another fellow conservative. So that's what this article does. It's like, this is what
Yes.
conservatives want to conserve. And I think it's necessary to be able to articulate the points that define what we claim to believe and what we claim to be. And so that's the value in this. And as you and I
Yes.
were talking about before, it doesn't necessarily go all the way down to the level of explaining the why behind these beliefs yet. And I hope we'll get an opportunity to do that in a future podcast. You at least have to start by saying what you believe, and then you can articulate why you believe it and test it, whether or not that's a valid belief or not. But in this idea that conservatism seeks truth that has emerged over time, the two things that you mentioned there that are important to the type of truth that we're trying to identify, one is it's human experience over time, and trying to be as honest as we can about both of those things, being honest about human nature, being honest about the human experience as it's been observed over a long period of time. That is the type of truth that we're after. I think it was Margaret Thatcher that said that the facts of life are conservative. And what she meant by that was that, if you take away social safety nets, if you take away social contracts, if you take away, if you don't try to abridge consequences in any way, the theory, the idea behind what she's saying is that you will become a conservative. You have to. The facts of life are conservative. Of course, she's British Prime Minister, and she was trying to illustrate that the realities of living within your means, individual responsibility, the need for order, that naturally align, all of those things naturally align with conservative principles if all other things are held at bay or are equal. And I think human experience over time has proven that to be true. That if you are forced to operate on your own, no one's coming to your rescue, you're not getting a bailout, you're not getting subsidized. You're not getting welfare. The behavior that will elicit from you is conservative behavior. And I think human experience over time has borne that out.
Yeah, 100%. Um, and the counter to that, and I guess we don't have the time to go through a counter to every single point, but I do want to do it in a couple cases, and this is one of them where the I'm just going to say, I'm not going to say the leftist ideology, but the Marxist ideology. So, a lot of this movement that's happened in America has a Marxist foundation. I'll call it a neo-Marxist foundation, um, where it takes the idea of intersectionality, which we've talked about briefly on a previous episode, of oppressor and oppressed dynamics. And there's almost an infinite number of oppressor and oppressed groups. Um, and so Marxist ideology incorporating intersectionality views truth as socially constructed through power dynamics and material conditions under capitalism, which oppresses, where oppressions like race, gender, and class intersect to shape subjective experiences and realities, often rejecting universal truths in favor of relative context-dependent narratives rooted in postmodern influences. So that's the contrast to the capital T truth, and like you said, built partly over human existence, which is why we still, or at least used to in the university, still study Plato and Aristotle. And the universities 100 years ago used to study the Bible. Harvard and Yale, these universities were started under Christian pretenses, because these are universal truths, and these are the truths that, again, the founding fathers knew inside and out. Whether they were actual practicing Christians or not, they still knew the biblical principles inside and out, including Thomas Jefferson, including even Thomas Paine. And they acknowledge, and Benjamin Franklin, those three right there are three, I won't say founding, they're not, like, Thomas Paine's not a founding father, but, he definitely influenced the founding fathers. But those three, for example, are three that were not Christians, but openly acknowledged the value and the sanctity and the strength of the Christian principles that made a country or society strong, and they openly acknowledged it many, many times. So, so these are the capital T truths. Whereas, again, this Marxist ideology that's gotten recent legs, I guess you could say, believes that truth is relative and there's not a capital T truth. And it reminds me of, you familiar with G.K. Chesterton's phrase, Chesterton's fence, which is essentially that if there's a fence in the middle of a field, in the middle of nowhere, and you're not from that area, and you just kind of drive up and you see this fence in the middle of nowhere, like, what's this fence doing here? And you just remove it because you don't know why it's there. And then you leave, and then, the herd of cattle comes a few minutes later and tramples over some crops that are supposed to be protected or whatever. So the idea being that fences and rules and structures that society learns over time, which is why it's so important to understand history and learn history and learn from it. These societal structures are in place for a reason. Now, it's
Mhm.
fine to question them and to challenge them. We should do that. But if you just throw it out because you don't agree with it in a given moment, or, and that gets right down to the importance of family, father, mother, child, base foundation of a society, things like that, that a lot of this Marxist ideology just throws out. Uh, many babies with the bathwater, so to speak, under their mindset that, um, assuming that these old structures have led to oppression and inequality. And the reality is, over the centuries leading to today, inequality has gotten less and less an issue, in the sense of individual freedoms, rights and freedoms, which again started, I think, with British biblically influenced ideology that came from Britain mostly, and from parts of Europe, and the Enlightenment and things like that, and early revivals, all heavily influenced American culture. Um, and but point being, these things were all heavily influenced by knowledge that the founders had from centuries and centuries ago, and they studied it, and and it made sense to them, and they examined them. And just because the world is not a utopia, which it never will be, doesn't mean you just throw out all the structures because, oh, we're not quite an utopia yet, so let's just throw all this out and start from scratch, and let's let the government run society based on the whims of the time. So anyway, I'll get off my soapbox because we'll never get this episode if we don't.
That's really good, man.
This.
You mentioned a really good thing. Here's the reason why it's so hard for the left and the right, conservatives and Marxists, whatever terms you want to use, so hard for them to talk to each other today, is because we can't even get beyond point one. We, as you just said, we're seeking truth, capital T, that has emerged over time in human experience. But the other side of the argument is not even willing to concede that there is such a thing as truth. And so our very first point in the Conservative Credo presupposes that there is such a thing as truth, and they disagree with that. And so it's really difficult to even get off the ground in this conversation. And it's funny that this is not really funny. It's not a good word to use for it. It's interesting that has been the question for ages and ages. As you were talking, I was reminded of Jesus's trial when he's standing in front of Pilate. This is the question that Pilate asked him: what is truth? And and we've been looking for that answer. In Pilate's case, it was truth was literally standing right in front of him. But for what we're talking about here, it is a quest, looking for truth, looking for these self-evident truths, as the founders said in the Declaration of Independence, and trying to use those truths as we learn them to structure a government, to structure society. And really, these truths should matriculate into some type of law and legal code. That's what our legal code is. And the purpose behind that is to curb certain human behaviors that we've observed over time, either to incentivize or disincentivize certain behaviors. And that is the very foundation. That's the whole premise behind a civilized society. And one of my favorite verses of the song "America the Beautiful," we generally only sing, the first verse or whatever. So much great theology is lost in churches by not singing the second, third, and fourth verses of songs. But anyway, one of my favorite verses of "America the Beautiful" is the verse that ends with "America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, and liberty in law." That phrase, confirm your soul in self-control, liberty in law. It's the fence that you were talking about. As Chesterton said, don't take down a fence without at first figuring out why it was there in the first place. My mind went to engineering lanes, which you're probably familiar with, clearing minefields and stuff. The engineers would blow a path using a Micklick or whatever through a minefield. And then they would just take that real small white engineering tape to mark the lane that's safe to walk in. And that's the way I see laws, liberty and law, and laws for liberty. Absolutely, you're free to explore the areas on either side, of that engineering tape, at the risk of having your legs blown off. Because we know this path is safe. And there's nothing about that engineering tape that is going to prevent me from stepping over it. It's not a fence. It's not a wall. I absolutely can, with minimal effort, step over that tape and explore the minefield to my heart's content until something bad inevitably happens. That's my view of these truths that have been established, that have been laid down in law for the purposes of preserving liberty, acknowledging the dangers and marking out a safe path through this minefield that we as individuals and countries have to navigate.
Yeah, and a lot of those paths, though they've been clearly marked for millennia, again, periodically get thrown out or questioned to the point of being disregarded, and then society then suffers consequences. And by the way, the Old Testament is a beautiful summary, a painful summary of this, because the Israelites, basically throughout the Old Testament, the way I kind of summarize it is that they, they're God's chosen people. God tells them what to do. They try to do it. They don't do it perfectly. Then they get complacent and they turn away from God. God punishes them or lets them be punished essentially as a result. Then they repent and come back to God, and that happens over and over and over and over and over again in the Old Testament, um, as a warning to us to recognize that these principles, if we just follow them, we'll have a healthy society, knowing that we'll never follow them perfectly because we're imperfect. But if you just disregard them, something else, so you're going to go off the deep end.
Yeah, the Israelites seemed intent on finding every mine in the minefield
Yeah,
the hard way,
exactly.
and then coming back to the safe path until straying again. And
Yeah.
it's painful to watch a country do that. And in many ways, America is starting to do that as well. Whether we're
Yes.
talking about Marxism, socialism, communism, which is like literally on full display in places like New York City, for example.
Yes.
We know we've seen other people step on these mines in the past, but yet for whatever reason, um, we're we insist on exploring the minefield the hard way ourselves.
Yeah. We've already kind of touched on number two, and this is probably the most controversial of all the principles, with for those who aren't believers. But that conservatism is rooted in the acknowledgement that God is our creator, and again, that's right in our Declaration of Independence, um, and that the human soul sojourns through this realm toward its eternal, transcendent fulfillment. And we are all flawed human beings in need of redemption, capable of great evil as well as great good. So that's the second principle. And let me just do the third one for time. And because man is fallible by nature, the conservative seeks to limit the damage that can be done through the abuse of power by limiting its concentration. So, we talked a little, well, the first part, it's talk acknowledging that God is our creator. We talked about that a lot already. And it mentions in the article that it's eternal transcendent fulfillment. That is not on earth, though people who, I would say, kind of the Marxist ideology, I think, believes that you can have, again, I mentioned it before, kind of a utopian outcome on earth. And that's what we're trying to strive towards, this utopian society where everyone's perfectly equal and everyone has exactly what they need. Not recognizing that there's trade-offs to that and it cannot be achieved. Anyway, so acknowledging that, this utopian mindset, I think, is probably kind of sort of in the heart of everybody, but for the believer, for the Christian, it's not on this earth; it's in heaven. Um, and we know, because the Bible says we're going to struggle on earth, and we're we are to be challenged to help the downtrodden and the widow and the fatherless, all these things, which will always be there. And we're challenged individually to meet their needs, and we do it imperfectly, and the church does it imperfectly. We've said that many times, in many different episodes. But it cannot and does not happen through government coercion and inefficient government bureaucracies. It tries, um, but it should be done at the individual level as much as possible, and the church and the family. That's where it's most effective. And the man is fallible by nature. That's an acknowledgement the founding fathers were crystal clear on, which is why we have different branches of government, and we have the judicial branch, the executive branch, the legislative branch, um, because they're all meant to counteract each other and keep each other in check, because they recognized, having fled England and seeing all the problems that were happening in England, and there wasn't enough checks and balances, and they were uh, taking advantage of the American colony, and there was no representation, not fair representation. So all these things played into it. Plus, again, studying Plato, Aristotle, and other ancient societies and governments recognized clearly that man is fallible, and you have to have checks and balances built into it. So again, it's just a basic principle that if you don't believe that, and you believe that government is the solution, and that if you get the right person in charge, the guy that I like, or the lady that I like, if she's in charge or if he's in charge, then things will be great. That's not how it works. That's not how people work. We're fallible. We have to be kept in check, and there has to be checks and balances.
A bad system will beat a good person every time.
Percent.
The Yeah, I think you're right. This is the most controversial point, and the thing that's in controversy is the existence of a creator. That's what they don't want to acknowledge, and I think there are reasons why they don't, because of the implications. If there is one, that means certain things. But I do think that folks who argue that point, that there is no creator, totally divorce, our form of government and our legal system from a creator. The seeds of their own destruction are in their own ideology that they're preaching, because those who strive to disprove the existence of a creator, they're literally working toward their own destructive end. Western civilization is founded on acknowledging and protecting the freedom and dignity of each person, dignity under the law, as you said, and acknowledging the individual responsibility that comes along with that. And that whole concept derives from what the founders called the self-evident truth, that all men are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights. And among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if these folks ever actually succeed in decoupling the Western worldview from a creator, then they will have destroyed the foundation of their own individual rights, their own individual liberty, and their right to pursue happiness. And ironically, their right to have their own opinions on matters like this, or any other for that matter. So for a group that likes to claim that they champion human rights, they will have to find some way to objectively prove that humans even have rights, or much less deserve them, whatever rights they claim are being violated. So it all becomes a very weak affair if there's no creator. And the second point that you made, that conservatism recognizes of all humans. And I think that, it goes back to that age-old question, are people basically good or basically evil? And conservatives acknowledge, again, through human experience over time, that people are not intrinsically good. And that's biblical as well. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. We're all sinners. There's none righteous. There's none that doeth good. No, not one. Conservatives recognize that, and they built a form of government that acknowledges it and then cleverly uses it to advantage. The system of checks and balances assumes that everybody in those branches are going to be working selfishly toward their own ends. And when all three of them are doing that together, it actually protects the system as a whole, which is genius. It's brilliant, right?
Brilliant.
And
Yep.
I think the difference between conservatives and liberals comes down to that question of basic human goodness and trustworthiness. And it's probably an oversimplification, but conservatives acknowledge, left to their own devices, humans are pretty shady people. but we expect you to be good. Whereas liberals say humans are basically good, but it's also okay to be bad. An oversimplification, but the other side of the coin seems to tolerate a lot of bad behavior and find excuses for it.
Yeah, and Marxist intersectional thought, in contrast to what we just talked about, sees human behavior as primarily shaped by systemic oppressions and capitalist exploitation, without an emphasis on inherent moral fallibility. Instead, it attributes societal ills to structural inequalities, viewing individuals as products of their intersecting identities and privileges, which can be perpetuate oppression unless actively dismantled by the government or by some kind of societal, structure. It just flips the perspective of the individual and the value of the individual and the
Accountability of the individual, not
accountability of the
responsibility.
individual, all that stuff, right? It blames it
Yeah,
on something else, which
the
again,
environment.
and that there's hints of truth to that perspective, because there are, of course, there are structures that oppress and are throughout, again, our American history. We clearly have had a structure that oppressed certain groups of people, unquestionable. And because of our founding values and the idea of individual liberty and that everyone is created by God, equal in dignity in His eyes, made in God's image, that idea is what led to the freedom of slaves. And it took a long time, because again, humans are fallible, corruptible, and clearly there was a lot of corruption at that time, in that vein. And it took a long time, and it took a civil war, and then even after the civil war, later on, it took um, more legislation. So, but it the whole time we were striving towards that foundational value in the Declaration of Independence, that we're all created equal. And Martin Luther King referenced it, that point, as did Frederick Douglass referenced that point, that, hey, we're not living up to our own ideals. So if we didn't have that ideal to begin with, we'd have nothing to strive for to undo these social ills. And again, uh, to give the Brits some credit, a lot of these ideas came from Britain, and in fact, they were the first major country to end the practice of slavery. We were, I think, more or less the second, and it's because of these principles and values, which again, the Marxists will just want to throw out, because it's not perfect in their eyes, or didn't happen the way they think it should happen, or it's not 100% equal now. Back to the Chesterton's, I can't say that word, Chesterton's fence idea. Okay, so let's see, we'll do 4 and 5. The fourth one was the conservative fosters the fullness of human potential by protecting the freedom and dignity of each person. We talked about the individual dignity already. Acknowledging that responsibility comes with freedom. Rights and duties are always linked, and you referenced that a little bit ago. And then for the conservative, each man and woman is equal in dignity and equal before the law, but gloriously individual and unequal in talents, aptitudes, and outcomes. The conservative celebrates the uniqueness of individuals and does not level to eliminate differences. So that's 4 and 5, paragraphs 4 and 5. And again, we touched on some of this already, some of these points, but you brought up a couple times the idea of rights linked with responsibilities. If you don't link the two, then things get way out of whack, because if the individual doesn't have responsibilities, well, someone or some entity has to have responsibilities to enforce laws and regulations, and that defaults to, again, the government. If you're not willing as an individual and a family and a neighborhood and a society to self-regulate, then your freedoms will absolutely be taken away in order to ensure societal uh, cohesion, I guess. Your freedoms will be taken away, and that's exactly what happens in communist and socialist and Marxist governments. It's exactly what happens. The government doesn't even give the people a chance to self-regulate, and they purposely shun, you know, biblical and Christian beliefs because the government's going to do it. The government's going to instill order and regulation, and the government's going to tell you what your principles are, and you will adhere to them. And if you don't, you're going to suffer the consequences. So go ahead.
Yeah, without without responsibility, if there is no such thing as individual responsibility, it's impossible to have individual accountability. What are they accountable for if they're not responsible for anything, right? And this idea that, that it's all derived from the environment that you're raised in. I agree. We're all influenced by our environment. It shapes us. But to take that categorically, it was in a perfect paradise where Adam and Eve first sinned. They had the perfect environment, and it didn't stop them from doing what they did. And so to blame it all on an environment, I think is that's too easy. I don't think that explains it. Um, Equal dignity and protection under the law, absolutely. As you mentioned, we've had a checkered past in the United States of actually fulfilling that pledge, that promissory note that Martin Luther King talked about. And you're right, he talked about it. Frederick Douglass talked about it. Even more recently, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas mentioned mentioned it as well. Talked about it, basically saying that throughout America's history, there have been many, many times where we have failed to live up to the principles of the Declaration of Independence and our founding principles. But there has been no time in all of our history where those principles have failed us. And so you mentioned throwing the baby out with the bathwater before. People that want to hate on America, I think they really there's a nuance to it. They're not always wrong in the things about America's history that they hate. But that's different than hating the country itself. Acknowledging that we have not always lived up to the principles, but the principles are good. And that's the point of America, is to strive to live up to those in the future. And you can acknowledge failures of the past without hating the country itself, and and at the same time being grateful that the system is built in such a way that we have the ability to improve on those failures of the past. And I think that's where they miss it. Or in their mind, the improvement is a complete, uh, just completely doing away with responsibility and accountability, and basically uh, creating an entitlement mindset where there are no, uh, you can do whatever you want because you've been mistreated in the past, you know,
Right.
which is not helpful.
So I think we did through four. Now we're or through five. Now we're at number six. So the conservative honors the family as the essential building block of civilization. This is probably the second most controversial thing in society today. That the conservative honors the family as the essential building block of civilization. The house of worship as the locus for forming culture, and the community as the matrix for human interaction. Culture and community grow from relationships and affinities over time, rooted in place. Conservatives value the rich diversity of relationships, organizations, and private associations that make up civil society and intermediary institutions. Um, and we did, so this talks about the family specifically. The other points we kind of touched on already, I would say a little bit. Um, talks about the house of worship as a locus for forming culture. And that's a really important point that I think that even the church doesn't talk about too much, that when you have town in different neighborhoods of people that wouldn't necessarily know each other, where normally you would just know your neighbor more or less, or who you work with, but they all come together, not all, but those who go to a church, come to a church and worship together, and oftentimes have functions after church or before church or Bible studies or potlucks or whatever together. That creates a sense of cultural cohesion that is invaluable to a society. And that is another thing that is a negative outcome of decreasing church attendance, or, even like during COVID when churches were forced to be shut down. That's kind of another negative impact to that. It unravels society. And unfortunately, when a lot of churches were shut down, many people didn't go back to church after COVID, the COVID restrictions ended. And that, I think, has contributed to some of our societal uh, lack of cohesion. Um, because what replaces that, unfortunately, is a lot of social media. We think we're being social through social media and our phones, and that is not the same thing. In fact, that's a very corrupt version of social interaction, because back, you mentioned earlier about the echo chambers. We get in our echo chambers, and the algorithm forces us into just reinforcing our views instead of interacting with people and hearing other ideas, but working together as a society with the same basic general guiding principles that allow societies to function. Because in that group of people, there's inevitably people that will go through a hard time, go through a medical challenge, go through a divorce, go through a catastrophic job loss. And if you have a network of people that love you and know you, you will be there's a much greater chance you'll be helped and get back on your feet. Again, without government assistance, without this nameless government entity helping you, but people that you know by name helping you, and your church helping you. Well, just one example of how valuable churches are in worshiping together in person, not watching sermons online, though that's fine to get the biblical principles out of it, but actually going to the church with people and seeing them every day and knowing their names, knowing their families, knowing their kids. So that's something that's not talked about very much. So that's why I want to tease that out, because it's just kind of a quick line um, in that principle, in that paragraph. Um, and let's see what else. Yeah, so that's all. What are your thoughts on that? On principle number 6?
I think you're right that strong community comes from a shared reality, and that's why I think online relationships don't really don't really build a community. We talk about the online community, but it's not really a shared reality with a large group of people. I guess it is kind of a shared reality, but it's a stovepiped reality, and it's reality that is created and curated for just the people who want to be a part of it, right? And it's very easy online to block anything that doesn't conform with the reality that you and this online group want curated for yourselves. That's not the case when you're in person in a place that you don't control. You have to learn to deal with things that you don't necessarily agree with, and it builds a shared reality of actual reality, not a virtual reality. And I don't know, have you ever done online classes with like college courses or whatever?
I never. Well, actually, I taught an online class and command and staff. Right when I retired, I taught command and staff online. Very challenging.
Yeah.
But yeah,
And so, I've done online college courses, and having graduated from a brick and mortar school, I can tell you that being part of the class of 2004 of West Point is a lot different than being a member of the online class of 2014 from Piedmont Technical College in South Carolina, right? Like the bond and affinity that I have with my West Point classmates, where we had a shared reality. It was a sucky reality at a lot of times, but that's part of what built the community and made us strong. Totally different from the online collaboration that I had when I took some community college courses. And so that in-person shared common reality, I think, is important for building a community. And as you pointed out, that was absolutely destroyed during COVID. Everybody was isolated, and if you had any community at all, it was a virtual community online that was carefully sculpted and curated, to suit the people who were part of that community. Um, and when we do that, because everybody's online, most people are online and in social media of some sort, we don't have a shared reality anymore because the groups that you're in are different than the groups that I'm in. The way algorithms and all that stuff work, my reality is different than yours online. And that's true for everybody. And so even when we do come together in person, we're not on the same wavelength because we don't live in the same realities, literally. The information that we absorb, it's just different. I have a question though. This third point under this, culture and community grow from relationships and affinities over time, rooted in place. What do you think that means, that last part, rooted in place? Over time, rooted in place.
I'm guessing that means, um, like your town, your neighborhood. I mean, ultimately, at the nation level, the country, America, I think that we put value on country of America, which is a geographic place, but we put more value in it. And back to your town, like whatever town you're from. I'm from a town in Montana, and I'm proud of it. I haven't lived there in 25 years, but there's something about a place, not just because of the geography of it, but because of the experiences that you had there with people, with these interactions with people. And I think if you don't, it kind of reinforces your point. I think maybe inadvertently, you talked about how you can't have the same thing online because online is not a place. It's not a physical geographic place. It's digital. You're still, you and I, like we're talking right now. So there's a great interaction. We're great friends, but there's value in having a common shared location and place, and going to the same coffee shops, going to the same breakfast joints, going to the same church. Um, I don't know. That's the way I look. I think what she's getting at. Not sure though.
The way I read it is that you're rooted in a physical geographic location for a period of time, and you build a community around other people who are also in that same place for an extended period of time. And I wonder if maybe that's not another reason why a sense of community has eroded over the years with the advent of, very easy travel between airlines and vehicles. People don't stay rooted in place anymore. You go back in history 100 years, and I think it was not uncommon for somebody to be born and raised, lived and die, within a 25-mile radius or something. And I don't want to go back to that. That sounds terrible. But since nobody stays anywhere for very long, it seems like, and that would be interesting if we can find that data. Like, what is the average time that the average American family spends in one location? I have no idea.
Yeah,
It would be interesting though.
or
Coming from
subgroups that don't do that, like the Quakers.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and mostly Pennsylvania and other parts of Northeast that they just by their beliefs they believe in staying essentially there and keeping their culture and society rich, tied to a location, which is interesting.
Yeah, there are places down south, where I came from. A lot of the people who live there, their families have lived there generationally, and
Yeah,
so they don't tend to move away too much. Maybe my perception is skewed because of our time in the military. We were always moving around,
yeah,
but I know here, where I live in Virginia, my neighbors who just moved, they've been my neighbors for the last 5 years. They have a house here, but they almost never live there. They were always going to see their kids here, there, traveling, vacation. So even though they have a physical address here next to my house, I don't know how much of a part of the community they were able to be
Right.
because they're never here, right? And
Right.
then they literally just moved. They sold the house, so now they're going down to
Yeah.
South Carolina. Um, and so I wonder, how much of that has affected our sense of community. That even though we may have a physical address in a place, we're never home.
Right. Yeah. I think that's definitely a true thing there. True principle that I hadn't thought of till now. Let's see where we at here.
Number
Conservative
7,
values. Number 7, the conservative values. Oh yeah, I had to look this up. Subsidiary
big word.
subsidiarity. The conservative values subsidiarity because we know many of the best solutions to human problems are found at the level closest to the individual person. We foster personal, local care for persons in need, preferably face to face with someone whose name we know. We believe that human transformation occurs best in the context of a personal, loving relationship with accountability over time. We talked about a lot of this already. That's what being part of a church helps foster that, and knowing people in person and in your community uh, helps for that personal face to face care when we all inevitably need help at some point, and having a network of people that you love and trust and know personally helps you overcome that in the most healthy way possible, in the fastest way possible. But the subsidiarity, I looked it up and I got to look it up again here. It's kind of sort of a Catholic principle, and I wonder if the person writing this is Catholic or not. I suspect maybe she is, but um, so this is from Merriam-Webster. A principle in social organization holding that functions which are performed effectively by subordinate or local organizations belong more properly to them than to a dominant central organization. Um, it's an element of Catholic social doctrine that holds that what can be done at a lower level in a social system shouldn't be done at a higher one. Again, a principle completely counter to the Marxist ideology of big government solving everyone's problems and providing that structure and assistance. So I think again it ties right into the founding principles and founding values of the individual. John Locke famously influenced the founders of recognizing or defining that property rights, because the Virginia Declaration of Independence was ratified just before the American Declaration of Independence, and it had life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. I thought that was written by Jefferson, but it's actually written by somebody else. I can't remember the guy's
I
name
think it was
at this
George
moment.
Mason.
Yes, there you
Was it
go,
George?
George Mason. And of course, Jefferson changed it to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But the idea is the same, and it's influenced by John Locke, who says that property, whatever property you own, stems from the individual. So the individual, through their intellect, through their work, their elbow grease, they create and acquire property and belongings, and things like that. And you can even in modern times you can extrapolate that to intellectual property. It's the same concept, but it comes down, it's not just the things you own that you have the right to those things, but it goes all the way down to the individual, which is why uh, the individual has rights and should have rights. It does have God given rights. And with those God given rights and God given abilities and intellect and all that, we create and acquire property. So, um, yeah, so that's the concept behind that.
You were talking about how this principle was enshrined, from the beginning in our founding principles, founding documents. with problems being solved as close to the source as possible. What was it they said there in number 7? The best solutions to human problems are found at the level closest to the individual person, which really, without saying so, places emphasis on local government. And preferably no government at all necessary to solve the human problem. Anything that can be solved without the government should be. I think somewhere else in this article they mentioned that the one thing that the government is not capable of is love, and that is a human emotion that the government, regardless of its intentions, no matter how noble, cannot replicate. So ideally, we solve our problems without the government. If any type of government is needed, it needs to be as close to the people that have the need as possible, which would be local government. So when they say all politics is local politics, that's partly what they mean. And that's the way it was intended from the founding. That was the whole point of the 10th Amendment, that the federal government has only the powers that are enumerated in the Constitution, and anything that is not specifically enumerated as a federal power is reserved for the states or the people under the 10th Amendment. And we're taught in school that America has 3 co-equal branches of government. And that's actually not what the founders intended. If you read the Federalist Papers, they did not intend for all 3 branches to be co-equal. They are used as a check and a balance against each other, but they are not, at least in James Madison's eyes, were not to be co-equal. In the Federalist Papers, which it's kind of a heavy read, but I would recommend it if people can do it. Federalist number 51, James Madison wrote that in a Republican government, small r, Republican government, the legislative authority necessarily predominates. And then he goes on to explain that because the legislature most directly represents the people, controls lawmaking, and crucially, the power of the purse, and it would naturally be the strongest branch. And that expectation is precisely why the Constitution divides the Congress into 2 chambers and surrounds it with these checks and balances. So in James Madison's mind, as one of the founders, the legislative branch was supposed to be the most powerful because it was the closest to the people. The judicial branch was supposed to be the weakest, and the executive branch, they recognized that it was important, needed energy, but had to be restrained. And so that's why the Constitution places these structural limits on Congress, even though it was expected to dominate, because it's filled with human beings, which the other conservative principle is that human beings are fallible.
And then all of that at the federal level was also supposed to be in check by the state rights, the 10th
Yeah.
Amendment, which is seems like it's almost completely ignored, even though it's an amendment.
I mean, it's evident all throughout, the way they structured it, that they really did believe these things.
Yes. 100%. Yep. All right. Do you want to take 8 and 9?
Sure. Number 8, the conservative is more concerned with the culture than politics because the political realm is a derivative one, not primary in human existence. Political problems are at their root moral and spiritual problems, which blend into the economic realm. And political change is rooted in cultural change, which I think, is a long way around of saying what we've said on this podcast before, that politics is downstream of culture, and culture is downstream of the church. The church is supposed to be the conscience of the state. And I know that's a controversial statement too, with the whole separation of church and state, which is another topic altogether that we can get into with, where that term even comes from and its implications. But I think it is a true statement that religion affects culture, culture affects politics. And conservatives who are really interested in first principles and that truth, big T, and finding that and passing that on to those around us as well as our children, that is how culture is influenced. And if people are convinced of that, it changes their politics. And we know this to be true because we've seen it in the reverse. over the last 100 years, where it's not conservative ideology, but liberal and leftist, Marxist, whatever term you want to use, ideology that is in itself, if you peel all the layers back, it's a religion, what they believe. And they have used that belief to influence educational systems, even churches. And they have successfully changed, I believe, the cultural fabric of the United States. And as a result of that changed cultural fabric, you can see it manifested in our politics.
Yep, more than 100%. And it's we talked about it offline. It's partly because it's a easy ideology to understand and digest, and it peaks on the or the it manipulates the emotional aspect of things and sympathy and empathy. It's a whole other topic. Allie Beth Stuckey very well articulated the idea of toxic empathy, and Gad Saad, very controversial guy, took it to another level. And the book's coming out right now, or maybe already out, called, I think it's called Suicidal Empathy. Anyway, Marx's ideology plays on emotions and that kind of thing very, very effectively. So it's something that will never, I don't think will ever really go away, because, which is why we have to, and that's kind of why we're doing what we're doing right now. We're trying to articulate these principles, because if we don't, it's so easy to fall into these emotional traps that Marxism sets, which ultimately destroys society. That's the ironic thing, really quick, is, that a lot of people on the left will critique those on the right for being heartless and not caring about people, and that's true in some cases, just like it's true in some cases on the left. Very selfish motives, but you and I think the principles we're laying out here is, we believe these things because we do believe it's best for society and best for people, because we do love people and we do love society and want society to function and be as healthy as possible. That message, I think, is lost a lot in the political dialogue, the back and forth. Like you mentioned, politics is downstream from culture. And once it gets to the political realm, it just becomes a cat fight, and one side versus the next side. And what's lost in that is that we're all trying to, and I want to be gracious here. Those who believe, we're critiquing Marxist values this whole time. An overwhelming majority of people that adopt those values is because they really believe in them. They really do believe that they'll help people, help society. I acknowledge that, and we have to acknowledge that. Because if we don't, then it just becomes, they're the enemy and they think that we're the enemy, and that's destroying the country, and social media exacerbates that. But I digress. Yeah, so that was
Who was it
8, I think, right? Go ahead.
Yeah. Who was it that said, no man seeks evil for evil's sake, he merely mistakes it for the good that he wants, or
Right,
something to that effect?
right.
So I
And
want
that's,
to
again,
believe
that's
that
why
in people.
it's,
Go ahead.
and that's again why we have to have principles, because just the human mind will just naturally fall into false, false, oh boy, just our sin nature, and that's why we're supposed to continue to study history and study what worked and what didn't work in societies. And again, that's how these principles were devised. So you got to keep talking
Yep.
about it and do it in a gracious and persuasive way, which is what we're trying to do the best we can.
And that articulation of the why, that is literally what the Federalist Papers were designed to be.
Yes.
It was a, what's the word I'm looking for? Compilation of works by 3 different guys who wrote under the pseudonym Publius: James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton. It was a defense of these principles. And so it's kind of dense reading, but if you really want to know the mind of the founding fathers and why they believed the things that they believed and why they implemented those things in our founding documents, that's what you need to read. because we don't have to speculate about what they believed. I mean, they went to great pains to tell us in detail what they believed and why. And they were smart guys. They did a lot of research. They had looked at human experience over time as captured in secular history, everything from John Locke to Plato to Tacitus to all of these others. And they lay it out really well in Federalist. It is hard reading, but
Yeah, and they didn't agree on every single principle. Like
right. That's why
Hamilton,
they had to write it.
yeah, Hamilton wanted a stronger executive. Madison did not. He thought that was dangerous. But that's what, again, back to free speech and arguing these things openly and honestly and productively. And of course, when the first Congress was debating the Constitution, it was back and forth and a lot of angst, understandably. But so there's not, what we're reading here from this article is principles, but then to your point earlier is how do you apply them to practical governing guidelines. And even if we were to agree on these principles, and I think, again, I think the founders probably believed, like you said, almost to the letter of all these principles, whether they're Christians or not. But it still led to arguments of, well, how much power should one branch of government have, and how much power should the states have, and all that kind of stuff. And that's healthy. That's fine. And it gets back to why free speech is so important. When you try to suppress it and shut it down, you get into your silos and your preconceived notions and your biases. And anyway, so it's just important to know that part of the purpose of the Federalist Papers, and then there was the Anti-Federalist Papers, which all the points in the Anti-Federalist Papers weren't all bad, and the Federalist Papers all good. They both made good points. But the authors of the Federalist Papers ultimately won out with their ideas, and that's the whole point: is putting your ideas out there to the public so they can understand it and digest, and ultimately led to the Constitution.
And those ideas have worked for 250 years, so they must have gotten something right.
Yep, absolutely.
Point number 9 here is that conservatives believe that caring for our neighbor is so important that it should not be left to the government. The one thing government cannot do is love. That is what we are called to do in the private sector with our own time, talent, and treasure. You mentioned this before.
Yeah. And we've mentioned, I think, in several episodes, kind of a critique of our own church, the church body, that we don't do enough. And the church does a lot. We've said this many times. I don't want to get too defensive. The church does a lot. They help people over, other cultures and other countries and locally, but we can always do more. And I think if the church did better and lived closer to its Jesus' challenge to the individual in the church. When I say the church, you and I know that we're talking about, we're the church, the body of the church. It's not necessarily a building, a church building. It's the church as a whole, that the believer should be, through the church and individually, helping the downtrodden and helping the lowly and the widow and all that's said in the Bible. Living as close to the Mother Teresa life as possible when that's hard to do. Striving towards that, and the more we do that as believers, the less need for government people will want, or the less desire for government, because it's when the church doesn't step in to help the local society is when the government fills that gap, because the people ultimately demand it and vote for it. So, and I think the church as a whole, and I'm talking to myself too, has gotten complacent because of our society. We talked about it again offline, how our government, government intrusion and control and influence over society is so pervasive and so entrenched that we do, even those of us that believe these principles, can tend to sit back and kind of like, oh, the government will take care of it, like just subconsciously. The government's going to take care of this or that or whatever. But I think the church has to be challenged to recognize what its role is supposed to be to help society, and step up and challenge their congregation and challenge the individuals to step up to help people in their communities. That includes even for things like, in my opinion, after like a disaster or a hurricane or whatever, if you live in a part of the country that has a hurricane. I'm trying to do that here where I live in Johns Island, bring the churches together to be, because what we all witnessed after Hurricane Helene a year and a half ago, mostly impacting North Carolina. Some of us went out there to kind of help out the people after that. And I recognized right away that the first institution to stand up to help the people was the local churches. That's where the people went to get help, and that's where people went to bring supplies in order to help. And it just naturally happened. And I saw it, and I was like, it was a beautiful thing to see. Now imagine if churches were thinking that way ahead of time, preemptively, like recognizing that that's their role, is to help society both on a daily basis, the downtrodden, the widow, the fatherless, but also like in a catastrophe that, hey, we have a whole congregation here, people with all kinds of skills and abilities. And if we harness them preemptively, we can help society better when there's an emergency, which again is what happened. FEMA was not on the ground helping tangibly for many weeks after Helene. That's what I saw personally. Again, controversial statement for those assuming that, oh, FEMA. I'm telling you, they eventually did help, but it was very cumbersome, bureaucratic, and we were out there just taking care of business for free, from a Christian mindset.
I had similar experience when I was stationed down in North Carolina at Marine Corps Air Station New River. Of course, that's hurricane country. Like every year between June and November, that's hurricane season. And if you're one of the units that is in the chute to deploy, you also get tapped with the DISCO mission, which is defense support to civilian authorities, right? So, and you get sent all over the place, down to the Virgin Islands. We went down there after, was it Irma? Um, but anyway, you're right. The response, the federal and even state response to those types of incidences, even in places like North Carolina, where it happens almost every year, you're going to deal with at least one or two hurricanes. It's not smooth. It's very cumbersome, as you said, and bureaucratic. And the church that I was a part of down there was a church called Coastline Baptist Church. And similar to your experience, after a hurricane rolled through there and just devastated the place, trees and power lines down everywhere, people's homes destroyed, roofs caved in, grocery store supply lines, all that stuff is just down. And there's no immediate relief in sight. The church is a small church that we were a part of, but the portion of the community that we could affect, our whole church came together. We had connections outside of the state that we were able to, other churches, incidentally, outside of the state, who were able to gather materials for us in areas of the country that weren't impacted and trucked it to us. And I remember, being at the church, very late at night, midnight, sometimes wee hours of the morning, when some truck would come in from some other state nearby with all of these non-perishable goods and things that people needed, the basic necessities of life that they couldn't get. And our entire sanctuary, we just moved all the chairs out, and it turned into a giant distribution center, with big, huge crates and boxes of food and toiletries and all of these other things. And of course, we invited the community to come in, and we also made small boxes with food and toiletries and other things that people would need. And we started taking them out and just handing them out in neighborhoods. And so while it's a small church, a limited number of people, and I don't know, how much of an impact we had percentage wise on the need, but if every church in the area were doing that, you would have an impact. And
Yep.
then the men of the church, those of us with chainsaws and hammers and stuff, we would go out and we would help repair people's roofs and cut up trees in people's front yards and stuff like that. And that's what you're describing. That is the role of the church. That's something we should be doing. And some churches are. I don't know how widespread or reliable it is, on a larger scale, but that is what we should be doing.
Yep. And it reflects a mindset. Back to the whole point is, if the church had that mindset that we are here to help our community in any way we can and be prepared for it, that would take away the society's desire for government to help and do things, which as this says, and as you said, the government doesn't do things out of love very much. Definitely not to the same extent that a church does, which specifically does it because of love for the individual. Yep.
The 10th point here is that conservatives believe that the true, the good, and the beautiful are interrelated, and that all things are measured against these three transcendentals. So that phrase, that triad, if you will, the true, the good, and the beautiful, probably most people, if they're familiar with the phrase at all, they heard it from Charlie Kirk, because he used that phrase quite a bit. But it's not original with him. It goes all the way back to Plato and Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, and more contemporarily, C.S. Lewis kind of borrowed that phrase or something very similar in some of his works, like The Abolition of Man. But believing that the true, the good, and the beautiful are interrelated, and that all things are measured against those three benchmarks.
Andrew Clavin brings that up a lot as well in his podcast. And they're capitalized too, which is interesting. You should capitalize true, good, and beautiful. So I think again, that's the idea that that's God's creative. How would you say it? That's God's ideal method of creation, I guess, or desire of creation, is that it's true, that it's good, that it's beautiful, and that's what He wants for us. And let's just think back to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve. I mean, everything that God created. In fact, in creation, Genesis 1, He created it and it was good. He did this and it was good. It's stated, but it was also beautiful, like Garden of Eden. We think of it as a beautiful creation. And of course, the earth and the universe and is all beautiful. We can't deny that. I mean, I don't care what your beliefs are. You look at a nebula in space, and your mind blows. Like, that's incredible. That's beautiful. But that goes right down to the individual cells and atoms. Individual people. God's creation is good, capital G, good, and beautiful. And of course, it's corrupted by sin, and it's a whole other part of Genesis 1. And it is interrelated, and I think the point is, into the references you mentioned too. The point is that these are things that are objective and can be strived towards, and that is what these principles are meant to do: is to strive towards. Again, we'll never have a utopia on Earth, but it's striving towards these principles of pursuing what's true, good, and beautiful. I think a lot of times I've heard again, Andrew Clave and other folks talking about how, art and architecture, you hear this a lot recently, the architecture used to be beautiful. Look at Old English and old European architecture, beautiful architecture. Then you get to modern, and even old, American architecture, 1700s, 1800s, beautiful. Go to most capitals, the way they were built, beautiful. And then over time, it's gotten more modern and efficient and not beautiful. There's a few. I think Charlie Kirk brought that and started to talk about that too. And I think President Trump has also talked about that, how we've lost a sense of beauty in our societies and our cultures and in our art. Art also is supposed to be beautiful renditions of certain concepts and principles. But of course, art also has been, in a lot of cases, bastardized. And yeah.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of modern art and architecture, where architecture is concerned, I think practicality in a lot of ways practical and efficient has taken the place of aesthetics in terms of beauty, and it's cheaper. It's cheaper to make something that just gets the job done, as opposed to gets the job done is also really nice to look at. And then there's another side of it in art and architecture where it's almost like a rebellion. It's like, I'm going to do it this way just because I can, and it doesn't make sense and it doesn't have to. it's going to look, this weird way, just as almost a statement against previously conceived norms of what a building should look like, you know? And in one way, it's sometimes kind of cool because it really does. It's like pushes the limits of physics. You look at it, you're like, I don't even know how that thing is standing. That's pretty cool. But, it's also really abstract and weird. And like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to live there. I wouldn't want to work there. And I certainly
Right.
wouldn't pay for that if that were my building. But, it's kind of cool that they figured out how to build this thing that looks that way. Um, I do think though that, even this statement that we believe in and pursue and try to align with what is true, good, and beautiful, even though those are capitalized words, which the intent is that those things are objective. The opponents to conservatism do not concede that. They don't. True is subjective, good is relative, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so our challenge is to somehow, if you're zeroing a weapon, first thing you got to do is bore sight that thing to like get your shot on paper somewhere so you can kind of figure out what the next adjustments to the sight should be. And right now, we're not even on paper with our opponents. And so it's difficult to walk the adjustments on to the black, to the center of the target. Because the round is like no impact, no idea on the other side, And that's the challenge. That's what we're trying to do here. That's what the Federalist Papers purported to do. That's what exhuming Publius, is aimed at doing. And it's hard. It's gonna be hard. It's a long road. Hard,
Absolutely.
patient work.
Absolutely.
Principle number 11 kind of acknowledges that. And I kind of think that principle 11 should be principle number 1
Yeah.
because it
That's a good one.
starts with a definition that we believe that there is a truth and that it is knowable and that it is our duty to seek the truth and live it throughout our lives. If I were writing this article, if I were laying these principles out, I would put that as number 1 because that is the presupposition upon which everything else is based.
Yeah, and then it goes into conservative believes that the virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance should be practiced in both private and public life. And we believe that virtues, not values, define the human soul. We have one more after this. I wish we could do a whole episode on just number 11 here, like you talked about. Like there's a lot there, and just defining the words prudence and fortitude and temperance, which are words not in our common language today, and what that means. I wish I could pull the thread. I had the time to pull the thread on that. I will say that it made me think of Philippians 4:8. Chapter 4, verse 8, it says, "Finally, brethren, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things."
That's a perfect tie-in.
Yeah, and that summarizes, or that kind of ties right into a lot of these words that uh, and again, we've said it several times. You just said it. It all ties to a truth, a knowable truth that, thanks to our benevolent Creator, gave us a Bible to read and understand and learn and digest the truth. And of course, the Holy Spirit is given to believers to have greater insight on those truths that are given to us in that Bible, and they're objective. Anyway, yeah, that's super, super important. I'll go to the last one unless you have any other last comments on that one.
That's good. I know you're pressed for time.
Yep. Okay. And then paragraph 12 says, "We believe that love is the highest motivation of the human person, and that the purpose of life itself is to know God, to love Him and serve Him, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. Our ultimate fulfillment is in the transcendence of love." Yeah. We can talk a lot about that as well. That's the ultimate goal. And I referred to it earlier how, the two political sides accuse the other of not loving or not caring or perverting love or the idea of love with, toxic or suicidal empathy. That's not love. But the love for the individual person, looking at it from, again, the idea that God created every single human being in his image. I just love that concept in the Declaration of Independence because it's just a few words and it says so much. And I think if we get back to that as a nation, as a principle, rather than again throwing it out with the bathwater because the person who wrote it owned slaves and all that, that's unfortunate. That was a sin, hypocritical. I got it. But the phrase that was written encapsulates so much biblical truth that God created every single human being in his image, equal in dignity in his eyes. And if we all looked at the person through that lens, which is ultimately loving the person that God created, man, in my mind, there's not a more unifying concept than that right there. That would, if you just take away the political framing that we're just so bathed in now, if you, in theory, were to tell anybody from any persuasion um, that ask them if they agree with the belief that every human being was created equally, because ironically that's what the Marxist ideology claims they're trying to achieve that equality through forced outcomes. And they just continue to miss the fact that when you try to force that through coercion and government control, it's to taking away individual freedom and rights. And that's where our beliefs come in, is that loving the individual and the person is doing everything we can to help them be successful in their lives by protecting their individual rights and freedoms, and by connecting them with encouraging family bonds and encouraging societies and church community, because we love the individual. If that makes sense.
Makes
We
perfect
believe that
sense.
that is the foundation, that, and it's been proven over time. Again, never perfectly, never will be perfect, but it's the type of society that leads to the best structure for an individual to grow closest to their fullest potential that God has in mind for them.
Yeah. I think there's a severe lack of love on both sides of the political spectrum. Both sides are so worried about being right that they've totally lost their love for each other. And I don't think it's so much that they hate each other as they're afraid of what the other believes. And because of the implication of what they fear that the other side believes, they feel threatened by it. And that devolves into hatred. But I don't think that the opposite of love is hatred. I think the opposite of love is fear. For that reason. Have you ever read Stephen Pressfield's book, Gates of Fire?
I think I
You
did a long
probably
time
did
ago.
when you went through.
Yes. I
They
was on the
made
Marine
us
Corps
read it
reading
at
list.
TBS. Yeah,
Yeah.
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 There's a fascinating book, by the way, about the Battle of Thermopylae, the Gates of Fire,
Yeah.
the 300, the Spartans. Most people probably have seen the movie but haven't read the book. The book's better. Um,
Yes.
a lot of colorful language in it, though, so I don't necessarily think I can just endorse it or recommend it. But it is a good book and a good story. And one of the things that always stood out to me about that story was during the Battle of Thermopylae at the Hot Gates. Well into the battle, when many of the Spartans had already been killed. The scene that Stephen Pressfield writes, taking creative liberties with it for sure, but there's a group of Spartans around a campfire one night after that day's battle, and they're having this discussion about courage. And the question is, what makes men jeopardize their own lives for a cause or for other people? And they're trying to get to the heart of what courage is, um, and how people overcome fear. And to make a long story short, the Spartan soldier that ultimately comes up with the answer to this is that in the end, they're not fighting for necessarily a cause or even idea. They're fighting for the person standing on either side of them. And they do it because they love that individual and they love the people back home. And so the conclusion that they come to is that the opposite of fear is not courage. The opposite of fear is love. And which is kind of the flip of what I just said earlier, that the opposite of love is fear. And I had never thought of it that way before until I read that book. And then, of course, as I'm reading through scripture, I find that principle is very clearly articulated in scripture in 1 John chapter 4 and verse 18, where it says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casteth out fear. And so those are the two opposite ends of that spectrum, I think. And we often think that the opposite of love is hatred, but I think it's fear, and fear leads to hatred.
Yes.
And maybe that's why you and I were drawn to military service, because also in scripture, greater love hath no man than this, than a man lay down his life for his friend. And I think that is something so unique about military service, about law enforcement, about first responders like firefighters, is they are literally willing to sacrifice their lives for people who don't agree with them, and who in many cases hate them because they fear what they may believe. And we're just not very good at communicating what we believe in love. The way we communicate it many times causes people to fear what they think we believe and what that implies, the implications that has for them. And because they feel threatened by what they fear that we believe, they hate us. I think that's true on both sides.
Percent. And they both sides come up with labels to label the other, to encapsulate what their fear is. And yeah, it's just it leads to division, and it leads to, othering people, othering the perceived enemy out of fear. That's very well said.
So figuring out a way to articulate this and to do it graciously, as you said earlier, is so important. And people get passionate about what they believe, and it can come off very threatening from both sides.
Yep. Yeah, and just recognizing that when you get into an argument with somebody, you're not necessarily going to win them over right there in the middle of that argument. That you definitely won't do it if you're a jerk with your points, or if you're mean, or if you castigate their humanity and what they believe. You're not going to win them over like that. But if you approach it with grace and with persistence and clarity, you're not going to win them over even then at the moment, but they'll at least probably listen, and they'll go back and reflect on what was said. And that's the only way to, I think, bring unity based on truth, because the truth can offend. The truth does challenge, but it has to be said with grace and humility consistently out of love. That's the only way minds can be changed.
Yeah. And I think, that's true politically for sure. It's also true spiritually. And a lot of times churches, what was the name of that church? They were very, very aggressively pro-life, anti-abortion, which I agree with. I am pro-life as well. But the way this church went about it was just not good. Westboro Baptist Church. Do you remember those folks?
I do.
Somewhere out west, I think. But anyway, their approach was counterproductive for sure.
Yeah.
And, the browbeating people, as you said, getting in their face, aggressively, trying to make your point and trying to win the argument. That seems to be the way some people think we need to go about it. But I'm always reminded of the verse in Romans, chapter 2 and verse 4 that says that the goodness of God leads people to repentance,
Right.
not scaring them to death necessarily or humiliating them or intimidating them. It's it's his goodness that draws people to him.
Right. And if we have faith in God, we're supposed to have faith that his word does influence. What's the scripture? The two-edged sword. The scripture is like a two-edged sword.
Yeah, it's sharper than any two-edged sword.
Yeah. So I have a hard stop, unfortunately. This is awesome. I didn't think we were going to get through all 12 points. I'm glad we did. It was very rich, and I'm really looking forward to going back and listen to this whole thing again.
Thanks for the topic, man.
Yeah,
was
man,
good.
absolutely.
I remember when you shared this article with me 4 years ago. I saved it then.
Yeah, and when I shared it with you just as an idea for this podcast, I didn't say it in the chat, but I was pleasantly shocked that you remembered. As soon as you saw it, you're like, oh yeah, I remember this from 4 years ago. I'm like, wow, that's awesome. Marcus does read the things I send him. That's great.
Very well done. I
Yeah,
do. I
I
may not
appreciate it.
always respond immediately, but I do
Same
read
here.
everything.
No, yeah, we're all busy as heck. But yeah, I'm looking forward to offline again. You brought up some really good episode ideas. I'm looking forward to it. I don't want to say it now until we get things arranged. We're looking at getting more guests on the podcast with some really incredible experiences. And again, folks, we really would appreciate it if you share, if you like this podcast, and go to the shorts. If you want little nuggets of wisdom, go to our shorts on YouTube and just watch 1 minute long length shorts of several of the podcasts. I go back and watch some of the stuff that you've all said. My stuff's kind of like, but what you guys have all said is pretty profound.
Don't sell yourself short, man.
And just share it with folks, folks, because we want our audience to grow, because it helps keep us going, both with just the motivation aspect and also your comments on Facebook and on the podcasts platforms are helpful as well. I try to respond to when I see them. But
and
as
a
we
plug for
say,
Substack as well. If folks go on Substack, there's not only these
Substack,
podcast episodes, but there are articles as well that we've written.
and we're going to put more articles. We have
Yeah.
some in the can that we're ready to kind of put out there soon, including I found a couple from Mike Pedlow back when we had the blog a while back. He did a couple that I forgot about that I'm going to try to ask if we can put them on there. So anyway, thanks everybody. Great hanging out with you, Marcus. Really enjoyed the conversation as always. Very enriching and enlightening.
Always, man. Appreciate you.
All right.
And
God bless,
Happy New
brother.
Year.
Happy New Year to you too. Thanks again.